Wonder Woman has always been one of the DC's most iconic heroes. She's part of the Trinity, she's instantly recognisable, and she's inspired fans for generations. But she's also one of the hardest characters to get right on screen. And if James Gunn doesn't crack the code for DCU, her place in this new universe could be in serious trouble. If you think about it, think about Batman. He's got consistency because he's grounded, dark, and endlessly adaptable, as we've seen across the board in his movie appearances. Superman has consistency because he represents hope, optimism, and the aspirational side of heroism. Even if you prefer Henry Cavill or David Corenswet, for me, they're two sides of the same coin. But Wonder Woman, she's been a little bit all over the place, right? So Gal Gadot's run had massive highs, like the first movie, which really connected with audiences, but also big lows, like 1984, which left fans so disappointed. For me, this means she hasn't had that definitive on-screen portrayal like her Trinity counterparts have had. This is a huge problem, so the DCU desperately needs her to work. Without a strong Wonder Woman, the Trinity, it won't feel balanced, and the Justice League is going to suffer. So in this video, I'm breaking down exactly what needs to happen to make Wonder Woman work in the DCU, from how to balance her mythological roots with a modern cinematic universe, to what villains and themes best highlight her character, to how she can elevate Batman and Superman, the Trinity, the Justice League, and the DCU overall. And I'll tell you right now, the answer is not obvious, but it is essential. I'm Phil from DC Chronicle, and you're in the right place for everything DCU. Please do consider hitting the subscribe button and liking the video, and let me know your thoughts on the DCU Wonder Woman in the comments down below. So let's start with the core issue. Why does Wonder Woman struggle compared to Batman and Superman? I think the biggest reason is that she's so deeply tied to mythology. Gods, Amazons, magical weapons, fantasy settings, all of that it's so awesome, but it can feel disconnected from the rest of a shared cinematic universe. And it can also divide opinion. I've been of the opinion, right? And I remain of the opinion. I'd love to see Hades and Cerberus in a Wonder Woman movie, but I tell you now, if you have that opinion on Twitter, you get clowned for having that. Batman, he feels at home fighting gangsters and clowns in Gotham. Superman feels at home battling aliens and saving the planet. Wonder Woman sits somewhere in the middle. She sits between myth and modern day, and her movies and her portrayals haven't always figured out how to make that balance work. And then there's also the issue of consistency, right? So the first Wonder Woman had a real emotional weight, a clear story, and I loved it, audiences loved it. But then came Wonder Woman 1984, which lost focus, the stakes were messy, and it just felt completely inconsistent. That swing between success and failure makes it hard to know what a definitive Wonder Woman movie should look like. Even more divisive Batman and Superman projects still have their fans, but 1984 just missed the mark entirely. And then, unlike Batman or Superman, she doesn't have a well-established rogues gallery in mainstream media. Outside of obviously the fans, me and you, we know her villains. Outside of that, I feel like very few people could name her villains, and that's why it often feels like filmmakers are improvising with their stories instead of building on that deep mythology. Right now, Wonder Woman doesn't have that same strong foundation that her Trinity counterparts have, but here's the thing, that uniqueness is also her strength. And if DC and DC Studios leans into that properly, they can create something that feels so fresh and essential to the DCU. So what's the key, right? The key to making Wonder Woman work in the DCU, balancing mythology and modernity. If you lean too hard on the mythological side, you risk alienating audiences who just want to see superheroes and superhero action in a shared universe. The gods, the Amazons, magical artifacts, it can all feel like a completely different franchise if it's not connected to the larger world, and don't even mention Hades. But if you strip all that away and make her too grounded, she loses what makes her special. She becomes just another warrior character when her mythology is what sets her apart. So what's the solution then? The DCU can show us mythic realism. This phase is called Gods and Monsters. Show us a world where gods are real, where ancient battles still cast shadows on the modern day, but anchor it in stories that matter to people right now. Imagine Wonder Woman fighting Circe in the middle of Washington DC. We know Circe's around, right, from Creature Commandos. And that clash, it's not just magic v magic, But what happens when that mythology and Themyscira and the Amazonian history bleeds into our everyday world, like we know can happen again from Creature Commandos? We've seen glimpses of how that can work before. Patty Jenkins nailed it in the first film, grounding Diana's mythological background with that very real horror of World War I. Zack Snyder's Amazons in Justice League, the Snyder Cut, they felt powerful, ancient and larger than life, but still connected to the stakes of the present and that threat from Steppenwolf. Even projects like Percy Jackson, they show audiences can really love the idea of mythology colliding with the modern day. If the DCU can nail that balance, Wonder Woman becomes not just another superhero, but the bridge between worlds. So before we look forward, let's learn from the past. The first Wonder Woman movie worked because it had a clear emotional core. Diana's journey from Themyscira to the battlefields of World War I gives her like this fish out of water story, a clear villain in Ares. I know some people didn't like how that worked in the end, but I did like it. And a strong theme, right? The belief in love and the belief in humanity, even in the face of war. It was focused, it was emotional, and it resonated. But then 84 happened and it became a case study in how not to handle that character. Stakes were messy, the villains weren't compelling enough, and the tone jumped between camp and melodrama in a way that felt inconsistent. It lost sight of Diana's strengths and tried to lean into the spectacle without grounding it in something that mattered. This is a Wonder Woman video, it's not a Gal Gadot video, so I'm gonna leave her delivery and some of the lines out of there, but you know. So here's the fix, right? So I've titled this video, Unless You Do This, and I don't do clickbait, so here's the this from the title. Wonder Woman works best when her stories are about people first, mythology second. And in particular, her connection to Steve, something else which started out strong, but became a mess in 84. That was done so well in the first movie and really delivered what I personally was looking for in that relationship. And again, we won't talk about what happened in 84. Her powers and her world are amazing, but if the emotional story isn't strong, the whole thing just falls flat. That's why some of her best portrayals have been in animation and in comics. Justice League Unlimited gave us a Diana who was both a fierce warrior and a diplomat. And some of the comic series really have nailed that complexity. If you think about the runs by Greg Rucka, Gail Simone, and how they handled that balance. So what is the takeaway from all of this? DCU needs to respect the mythos, yeah, but more importantly, it needs to ground her stories in human emotion, because when Diana is relatable, when her struggles are universal, that's when she really shines. So Wonder Woman won't work in the DCU unless she's framed and pushed as the bridge between gods and humanity, myth and modernity, monsters and villains. That's her unique role and it's what makes her essential to the Trinity. If you just make her a warrior, mythological warrior, she's disconnected. Just another street level fighter, she loses her uniqueness. But if you embrace her as the character that stands, has one foot in both worlds, you unlock endless story potential. Villains really are the key here. Characters like Circe or Ares or Hades can embody the mythological side, but balance that with grounded threats like, don't be afraid to throw in like Dr. Psycho, who can represent deeply human conflicts, in his case, toxic misogyny, control. That mix makes the stories relevant to today while keeping the myth alive. I've always thought the right way to follow up the first Wonder Woman movie would have been with a present day movie that takes after the Winter Soldier with Circe in that role of Bucky. She can mix her past with a political thriller where she tries to reconcile her upbringing, not just with the modern world, but with the politics of that modern world. And thematically, Diana has always resonated with her dual identity, right? So, is she a warrior, goddess, diplomat, friend to humanity? The answer is she's all of the above, and that tension makes her stories compelling. So, James Gunn, Anna Nogueira, and DC Studios nail this. Wonder Woman becomes more than just part of the Trinity. She becomes the heart that ties the mythic and the human together, which would then make her indispensable to the DCU. And then speaking of the Trinity, we can't talk about Wonder Woman without talking about her place next to Batman and Superman. Again, you know, this has always been a connected universe, so we need to talk about her place with those. Superman represents hope. Batman represents fear and justice. Wonder Woman represents truth. That triangle of values is what makes them so powerful as a team. And if one of the corners of that triangle is weak, the whole thing just falls apart. So how does Wonder Woman fit into this dynamic? She's the balance, Batman is dark, pragmatic, and grounded. Superman is optimistic, aspirational, and larger than life. Diana sits in the middle. She's the compassionate Superman, but the warrior edge of Batman. She's relatable and mythic. She's the character who can argue with Clark about the value of humanity and spar with Bruce about the necessity of violence. And both those arguments coming from Diana would make sense. And that's why, that balance is why the Trinity is so iconic and why Wonder Woman's role is so important. If she's mishandled in the DCU, the entire Trinity feels lopsided. But handled correctly, she elevates both Superman and Batman by being the voice that bridges the extreme versions of both of those. That's why it's crucial that the DCU doesn't treat Wonder Woman as an afterthought, which I know they won't. They need her as an anchor. I know Zaslav said that she's one of the 4 pillars and that really needs to be delivered on. We've seen this played out in stories that could be well adapted in the DCU. Look at what happened with her and Maxwell Lord. A lot of the components to bring that to life are already there in the DCU. And if they can nail this dynamic, then we're looking at a cinematic universe that finally does justice to all 3 pillars of DC Comics. So to wrap it up, Wonder Woman, she's not going to work in the DCU unless she becomes the bridge between gods and humanity, myth and modern. That's the secret. That's what we need to get right, get that balance right. She doesn't just succeed, she redefines what superhero storytelling in this universe can be. Because here's the thing, right? Season fans already know Batman will work. He's a home run every time, he always does. Gunn and DC, they've already given us a definitive Superman who can define a generation. But Wonder Woman is the real test. If she lands, then the Trinity feels complete and we're off to the races with the Justice League. If she doesn't, the whole thing feels like it's missing its centre. So the question becomes, what do you think? Should James Gunn lead harder into Wonder Woman's mythological roots and bring the gods front and centre? Or should her DCU storylines focus on more grounded, modern day struggles with humanity? Drop your thoughts in the comments, so I think the fan perspective will be crucial here. While you're at it, if you can hit like and subscribe, that really help me out. If you want more thoughtful DC discussions that go beyond the surface level hype. Wonder Woman is one of the most complex characters in comics, and if DC gets her right, she could be the one who elevates the entire universe.